What if I told you that the ancient wisdom attributed to Thoth and the revolutionary teachings of Jesus weren't separate spiritual paths, but two expressions of the same universal blueprint? Most people compartmentalize these traditions completely. Ancient Egyptian Hermeticism over here, Christianity over there. Different cultures, different times, different truths. But scholars have quietly recognized something extraordinary for centuries. These teachings are expressing identical principles using different languages. When Hermes speaks of mentalism, Jesus teaches, "As a man thinketh in his heart, so is he." When Hermetic texts describe correspondence, Jesus reveals, "The kingdom of heaven is within you." The parallels aren't coincidental, they're systematic. Here's what mainstream institutions don't emphasize. Both traditions outline 7 specific universal principles that govern reality itself. These weren't competing philosophies, but complementary revelations of how consciousness, energy, and creation actually function. This knowledge has been fragmented deliberately, keeping seekers from recognizing the complete picture. Understanding these 7 bridging principles doesn't just transform your spiritual perspective, it reveals the unified science of consciousness that both masters were teaching all along. The first Hermetic principle cuts straight to the heart of everything you thought you knew about reality. The all is mind. The universe is mental. This isn't some abstract philosophical concept. It's the fundamental truth that consciousness, not matter, is the primary substance from which everything else emerges. And here's what will shock you. Jesus didn't just understand this principle, he demonstrated it with a precision that left witnesses speechless. When Jesus declared that faith the size of a mustard seed could move mountains, he wasn't speaking metaphorically. He was revealing the deepest secret of how reality actually operates. The mountain isn't solid matter that exists independently of consciousness. It's a mental construct manifesting within the infinite mind of the all. Your individual consciousness, when properly aligned, can literally reshape what appears to be physical reality because that physical reality is fundamentally mental in nature. Think about this carefully. Every miracle Jesus performed makes perfect sense when viewed through the lens of the principle of mentalism. Walking on water wasn't a violation of natural law. It was the application of a higher law that recognizes consciousness as primary and physical laws as secondary. The water's apparent solidity or fluidity depends entirely on the mental state of the observer who truly understands their divine nature. This connects directly to one of the most profound verses in Scripture, Proverbs 23:7. "As a man thinketh in his heart, so is he." Jesus didn't just quote this principle, he embodied it completely. Notice it doesn't say, "as a man thinks with his surface mind," but "in his heart," referring to that deeper level of consciousness where true belief resides. This is where the real creative power lies, in the alignment between conscious intention and subconscious conviction. The implications are staggering. Your external circumstances aren't happening to you, they're happening through you, as expressions of your deepest mental states. When Jesus emphasized the need for inner transformation before outer change, he was teaching the practical application of Hermetic law. You cannot permanently change your external world while maintaining the same internal consciousness that created your current conditions. But here's where it gets really interesting. Modern quantum physics is starting to validate what these ancient teachings have proclaimed for millennia. The observer effect in quantum mechanics demonstrates that consciousness plays a fundamental role in determining physical reality. Particles exist in probability states until consciousness observes them into specific manifestation. This isn't mystical speculation anymore. It's measurable science catching up to ancient wisdom. The double-slit experiment shows that the mere act of observation changes the behavior of subatomic particles. When nobody's watching, particles behave like waves of potential. The moment consciousness observes them, they collapse into specific locations and behaviors. This suggests that consciousness isn't produced by matter, but rather that matter emerges from consciousness, exactly what the principle of mentalism teaches. Jesus demonstrated this principle when he multiplied loaves and fishes. He didn't create matter from nothing. He recognized that apparent scarcity was a mental construct and shifted the collective consciousness of those present into an awareness of abundance. The miracle was the alignment of consciousness with the truth that the all, being infinite mind, contains infinite provision. Consider how Jesus healed the sick. He didn't fight against disease. He recognized that disease exists only within a consciousness that believes in separation from divine wholeness. When he declared, "Your faith has made you whole," he was pointing to the mental shift that allowed perfect health to manifest. The healing wasn't imposed from outside, but emerged from the corrected understanding of spiritual identity. This is why Jesus consistently taught that the kingdom of heaven is within you. He wasn't referring to some future destination, but to a present state of consciousness that recognizes its divine nature and creative power. When you align your thinking with divine truth, with love, abundance, wholeness, and infinite possibility, your external world begins to mirror these internal states. The practical applications of this principle are revolutionary. Every morning, you're literally creating your day through the quality of your thoughts and the depth of your beliefs. When Jesus taught his disciples to pray, "Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven," he was providing a formula for aligning human consciousness with divine consciousness, allowing perfect conditions to manifest in apparent physical reality. Now, some of the most profound connections between quantum consciousness research and these ancient teachings are too controversial for mainstream platforms to discuss openly. The implications threaten too many established paradigms. That's why I share the deepest research through our free Insights Academy newsletter, where you can access cutting-edge studies on consciousness and reality creation. Plus, get your complimentary copy of the Kybalion for a limited time. You can start applying this principle immediately. Instead of reacting to circumstances as if they're fixed external realities, recognize them as reflections of your consciousness. When you encounter challenges, ask yourself, what belief or mental pattern in me is creating this experience? Then consciously choose thoughts that align with the outcome you desire, knowing that as you change your mind, you change your world. The reason this knowledge has been suppressed becomes obvious when you understand its implications. A population that truly grasps the principle of mentalism cannot be controlled through external manipulation. When people realize they're not victims of circumstances but creators of experience, the entire power structure that depends on feelings of helplessness and external dependency crumbles. Jesus wasn't teaching religion, he was teaching the science of consciousness. He was revealing that every human being possesses the same divine creative power that he demonstrated, waiting to be awakened through understanding and proper application of mental law. This is why his message was so threatening to established authorities and why these connections to Hermetic wisdom have been carefully hidden. The universe responds to consciousness because the universe is consciousness. When you truly grasp this first principle, everything changes. You stop being a victim of circumstances and become a conscious creator of experience, working in harmony with the same divine laws that Jesus used to transform water into wine and calm storms with a word. The second Hermetic principle strikes at the very heart of how reality operates. As above, so below. As below, so above. This isn't just ancient mysticism. It's describing the fundamental interconnectedness that governs everything from quantum particles to galactic clusters. And when you examine Jesus' teachings through this lens, something extraordinary emerges. He wasn't just preaching moral guidelines, he was revealing the same cosmic law that Thoth encoded in the Emerald Tablet. Think about what this principle actually means. It's telling us that patterns repeat across every level of existence. The spiral of a nautilus shell mirrors the spiral of a galaxy. The branching of blood vessels in your body reflects the branching of rivers across landscapes. The electrical patterns in your neurons echo the web-like structure of the universe itself. This isn't coincidence, it's correspondence in action. Jesus understood this principle so deeply that it became the foundation of his most revolutionary teachings. When he declared, "The kingdom of God is within you," he wasn't speaking metaphorically. He was revealing a precise spiritual law. The divine realm isn't some distant heaven separated from physical reality. It's reflected, mirrored, and contained within your very being. The macrocosm of God's kingdom corresponds perfectly to the microcosm of human consciousness. This changes everything about how we understand spiritual development. If the kingdom of heaven exists within you, then accessing divine power isn't about appealing to some external deity. It's about recognizing and activating the spiritual patterns already present in your consciousness. Jesus was teaching people to look inward for what they'd been taught, to seek outward. But Jesus didn't stop at philosophical concepts. He demonstrated the correspondence principle through his miracles. showing how spiritual laws could transform physical circumstances. Consider the healing of the centurion's servant from a distance. The centurion understood authority. He knew that just as his word commanded soldiers, spiritual authority could command physical reality across any distance. Jesus marveled at this understanding because the centurion grasped the correspondence between spiritual intention and physical manifestation. The miracle wasn't breaking natural law, it was applying a higher natural law. The spiritual realm operates by different principles than the physical realm appears to follow, but through correspondence, spiritual laws can override physical limitations. Distance, time, and material obstacles become irrelevant when you're working from the level of spiritual causation. Look at how Jesus consistently used natural correspondence to teach spiritual truths. His parables about seeds, growth, and harvest weren't just nice analogies. They were revealing identical patterns operating in both physical and spiritual dimensions. A seed must die to produce new life. This same principle governs spiritual transformation. Your old self-concept must dissolve for your higher nature to emerge. The farmer doesn't make the seed grow. He creates conditions and trusts the inherent life force within the seed. Similarly, spiritual growth happens through creating proper conditions in consciousness and trusting the divine nature already present within you. The external agricultural process perfectly mirrors the internal spiritual process. When Jesus taught his disciples to pray, "Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven," he was giving them a direct application of the correspondence principle. Heaven isn't just a future destination, it's a present spiritual reality that can be reflected into physical experience. The prayer is actually a technique for aligning earthly circumstances with heavenly patterns. But the correspondence works both ways, which Jesus revealed when he told his disciples, "Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven." This isn't about religious authority, it's about the bidirectional nature of spiritual, physical correspondence. Changes in consciousness create changes in spiritual reality, which then reflect back into physical experience. This principle transforms how you approach every aspect of life. Your external circumstances aren't random events happening to you, they're reflections of internal spiritual states. Financial struggles often mirror feelings of unworthiness. Relationship conflicts reflect internal divisions between different aspects of yourself. Health challenges frequently correspond to spiritual imbalances or unresolved emotional patterns. Jesus embodied this principle perfectly in his own nature. He was simultaneously fully divine and fully human, demonstrating the correspondence between heavenly and earthly nature within a single being. He wasn't half God and half human. He was showing how divine consciousness could be completely expressed through human form. This has profound implications for your own spiritual development. You're not trying to become something you're not. You're recognizing and expressing what you already are. The divine nature isn't foreign to human consciousness. It's the deepest truth of human consciousness. The correspondence principle reveals that awakening to your divine nature is actually awakening to your true human nature. Practically, this means you can diagnose spiritual issues by examining physical patterns in your life. Recurring problems in your external world point to specific spiritual patterns that need attention. If you keep attracting controlling people, examine where you're giving your power away internally. If abundance eludes you, investigate your deep beliefs about worthiness and safety. The beautiful thing about understanding correspondence is that it empowers you to create change efficiently. Instead of trying to fix every external problem separately, you can work on the spiritual level first, knowing that internal shifts will naturally manifest as external improvements. Change the pattern above, and the pattern below transforms automatically. Jesus taught this principle because it reveals the true nature of human potential. You're not a physical being hoping for spiritual experiences. You're a spiritual being having a physical experience. The kingdom of heaven isn't something you're trying to reach. It's something you're learning to recognize and express right here, right now, through the magnificent correspondence between your inner divine nature and your outer human experience. The third Hermetic principle states that nothing rests, everything moves, everything vibrates. When I first encountered this ancient wisdom, I had no idea how profoundly it would reshape my understanding of Jesus' ministry. We're talking about energy here, the fundamental force that modern quantum physics now confirms. underlies all of reality. Every atom in your body is vibrating right now. The chair you're sitting in, the air you're breathing, even your thoughts, they're all energy oscillating at specific frequencies. This isn't mystical speculation anymore, it's measurable science. But here's what absolutely astounded me. Jesus demonstrated mastery over these vibrational frequencies 2,000 years before we had instruments to detect them. Remember the story of Jesus calming the storm? Most people read it as a simple miracle, but there's something far more sophisticated happening here. When Jesus spoke the words, "Peace, be still," he wasn't just addressing wind and waves. He was commanding the underlying vibrational chaos that was creating the storm itself. Think about it. Storms are massive energy systems, swirling patterns of electromagnetic activity. Jesus literally commanded those frequencies to harmonize, to return to a state of calm resonance. The disciples' reaction tells us everything. What manner of man is this, that even the winds and the sea obey him? They witnessed someone operating at a vibrational level they couldn't comprehend. The Greek word used for obey here is hupakwo, which literally means to listen under, as if the natural elements were attuned to hear and respond to his voice frequency. This vibrational understanding completely transforms how we interpret Jesus' healing miracles. Disease, from this perspective, represents matter vibrating at lower, discordant frequencies. When someone was sick, their cellular structure had fallen into patterns that didn't support optimal health. Jesus didn't just heal symptoms, he restored proper vibrational harmony to their entire being. Consider the woman with the issue of blood who touched Jesus' garment. She felt virtue, the Greek word dynamis, meaning power or energy, flow out of him. This wasn't metaphorical. She experienced an actual energetic transmission that restored her body to its natural, healthy frequency. The text specifically mentions that Jesus felt this power leave him, indicating a measurable transfer of vibrational energy. But perhaps the most extraordinary demonstration of vibrational mastery was the raising of Lazarus. When Jesus called out, "Lazarus, come forth," his voice carried enough vibrational force to reverse death itself. The early church fathers noted something fascinating here. They said Jesus had to specify Lazarus by name, or else every dead person in the vicinity would have responded to that frequency. His voice literally commanded life back into dead tissue. This connects directly to what we explored earlier about the mental nature of reality. Jesus understood that sound, thought, and physical manifestation are all different expressions of the same vibrational spectrum. When he taught about the power of our words, he was revealing how speech carries creative energy. Life and death are in the power of the tongue. Isn't poetry, it's physics. Notice how Jesus structured his teachings, the repetitive phrases, the rhythmic quality of the parables, the way certain sayings seem to echo and resonate long after he spoke them. He was using sound frequencies to embed truth at deeper levels of consciousness. The Beatitudes, for instance, have a musical quality when spoken in Aramaic that creates what we'd now call brainwave entrainment. Even Jesus' presence carried transformative vibration. People were drawn to him from miles away, often without knowing why. Others, particularly those operating at lower frequencies through greed or hatred, found his presence disturbing. The Pharisees couldn't tolerate being around him for extended periods. His high-frequency energy made their lower vibrational thoughts and motivations unbearable. We see this principle in action when Jesus cursed the fig tree. His emotional and spiritual state, his disappointment at finding no fruit, generated enough vibrational force to affect the tree's life energy. The disciples were amazed that it withered so quickly, but Jesus used this as a teaching moment about the power of faith and spoken words to influence physical reality. Modern research confirms what Jesus taught about emotional frequencies. Love, compassion, and gratitude vibrate at measurably higher frequencies than fear, anger, and resentment. Dr. David Hawkins documented this extensively, showing how different emotional states correlate with specific energy signatures. Jesus operated consistently at the highest frequencies, what we might call Christ consciousness. This has profound practical implications for your spiritual development. Every thought you think, every word you speak, every emotion you feel is literally tuning your personal frequency. When you pray, you're not just communicating with God, you're aligning your vibrational state with divine frequency. This is why Jesus emphasized the importance of belief in prayer. Doubt creates vibrational discord that interferes with manifestation. The Lord's Prayer itself is a vibrational tuning exercise. Each phrase is designed to progressively align your frequency with higher spiritual realities. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, isn't passive submission. It's active vibrational alignment with divine purpose. Understanding these principles can revolutionize your prayer life and spiritual practice. Start paying attention to how different thoughts and emotions feel in your body. Notice how certain music, words, or environments either energize or drain you. You're experiencing vibrational frequencies directly. Jesus taught that we could do the works he did, and even greater ones. From a vibrational perspective, this makes perfect sense. As we learn to master our own frequencies through conscious intention, prayer, and meditation, we begin operating at levels that can influence physical reality. We become tuning forks for divine frequency, bringing harmony wherever we go. The ancient Hermetic masters understood this, and now quantum physics confirms it. Everything is vibration, everything is connected, and consciousness can direct energy to create change. Jesus didn't just teach these principles, he embodied them perfectly, showing us what human beings are capable of when we align with the fundamental frequencies of creation itself. The fourth Hermetic principle states that everything is dual, everything has poles, everything has its pair of opposites. When you examine Jesus' teachings with this lens, something extraordinary emerges. His entire ministry becomes a masterclass in understanding the deepest nature of reality itself. Think about the most famous paradoxes Jesus taught. The last shall be first, and the first shall be last. Whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life will find it. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. These aren't just moral teachings, they're precise descriptions of how polarity operates in the spiritual realm. Here's what most people miss about polarity. It doesn't mean things are separate or opposite in the way we typically think. Hot and cold aren't different things. They're different degrees of temperature on the same spectrum. Love and hate aren't truly opposite emotions. They're different intensities of caring, which is why the real opposite of love isn't hate, but indifference. Jesus understood this principle so completely that he built his entire teaching methodology around it. When he said, "The last shall be first," he wasn't just making a moral statement about humility. He was revealing how spiritual energy actually moves, how positions on the spectrum of consciousness can flip and transform into their apparent opposites. Look at the tax collector Zacchaeus. In first-century Palestine, tax collectors were considered the lowest of the low, traitors who sold out their own people to Roman oppressors. Yet Jesus chose to stay at his house, and Zacchaeus became one of the most generous disciples. The last became first through the principle of polarity in action. Jesus himself embodied the ultimate demonstration of polarity, being simultaneously fully divine and fully human. This wasn't a contradiction to resolve, but a paradox to embrace. He showed that apparent opposites don't cancel each other out. They can coexist in perfect harmony when you understand the deeper unity beneath surface appearances. Every miracle Jesus performed was essentially a demonstration of polarity mastery. When he turned water into wine at Cana, he wasn't violating natural law. He was working with the principle that everything exists on a spectrum of manifestation. Water and wine are both expressions of the same fundamental life force, just at different vibrational frequencies. By understanding this, he could shift matter from one pole to another. The feeding of the 5,000 follows the same principle. Scarcity and abundance aren't separate realities. They're different points on the spectrum of provision. Jesus recognized that what appeared to be not enough could be transformed into more than enough by working with the polarity principle rather than against it. But the ultimate demonstration came through his crucifixion and resurrection. Here was apparent defeat transformed into ultimate victory, death revealing itself as the doorway to eternal life, and what looked like the end of his mission becoming its eternal beginning. The cross itself became the perfect symbol of polarity, the intersection where opposites meet and transform. This is why Jesus consistently taught his followers to transcend either-or thinking and embrace both and consciousness. When the Pharisees tried to trap him with questions about paying taxes to Caesar, he didn't choose sides. Instead, he revealed a higher perspective. Give to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's. He showed that you can operate in both the material and spiritual realms simultaneously. His teaching about loving your enemies is perhaps the most profound example of polarity transcendence. Instead of getting stuck in the friend-enemy polarity, Jesus revealed that everyone carries the same divine spark. The enemy is just someone whose divine nature is temporarily obscured. By loving them, you're not being naive. You're recognizing the deeper truth that transcends surface appearances. This explains why Jesus spent time with prostitutes, tax collectors, and sinners rather than exclusively with the religiously righteous. He understood that moral polarities, good and bad, pure and impure, holy and sinful, are positions on a spectrum that can shift and transform. The prostitute could become the devoted follower. The thief could become the first to enter paradise. When Jesus taught about turning the other cheek, he wasn't advocating passive victimhood. He was demonstrating how to transcend the victim-aggressor polarity entirely. By refusing to react from the same energy level as the attack, you transform the entire dynamic. You move the interaction to a different point on the spectrum where new possibilities can emerge. Understanding polarity this way becomes incredibly practical in daily life. When you're experiencing what seems like a negative emotion, fear, anger, sadness, you can recognize these as positions on spectrums that can shift. Fear and courage exist on the same spectrum of response to uncertainty. Instead of trying to eliminate fear, you can gradually move toward the courage pole through small, consistent actions. The same applies to spiritual states. Faith and doubt aren't enemies, they're dance partners on the spectrum of belief. Even Jesus' disciples experienced doubt, and he didn't condemn them for it. He understood that doubt can actually strengthen faith by forcing deeper examination and more authentic commitment. Jesus showed that mastering polarity consciousness means finding peace and power regardless of external circumstances. Whether he was being celebrated by crowds or abandoned by friends, whether he was performing miracles or suffering on the cross, he maintained the same centered awareness. He had learned to find the still point at the center of all polarities. This is the consciousness that allows you to remain calm in chaos, to find opportunity in crisis, and to see potential in what others consider problems. It's not about positive thinking or denial. It's about recognizing the fluid, transformable nature of all conditions and learning to work skillfully with the forces of change rather than being tossed around by them. The principle of polarity reveals that every challenge contains the seeds of its own solution. Every ending carries the potential for a new beginning, and every apparent limitation can become a doorway to greater freedom. Jesus didn't just teach this principle. He lived it so completely that his entire life became a demonstration of how consciousness can transform any polarity into an opportunity for growth and service. The fifth Hermetic principle reveals one of the most profound secrets of existence. Everything flows, out and in. Everything has its tides. All things rise and fall. When you truly understand rhythm, you begin to see the invisible conductor orchestrating every aspect of reality, from the spiral dance of galaxies to the steady beating of your heart, from the rise and fall of civilizations to the breath flowing through your lungs right now. Jesus Christ embodied this principle so completely that his entire ministry reads like a masterclass in divine timing. Consider this. He wasn't born during just any random moment in history. He arrived during the Pax Romana, when Roman roads connected the known world and Greek was the universal language of commerce and learning. The conditions were perfectly aligned for a message to spread rapidly across continents. This wasn't coincidence, this was rhythm consciousness in action. But here's where it gets fascinating. Jesus didn't just align with historical rhythms, he synchronized with the deepest spiritual cycles governing human experience. His death and resurrection occurred during Passover, the most sacred rhythm in Jewish spiritual life, the annual commemoration of liberation from bondage. The timing wasn't symbolic, it was rhythmic mastery, weaving his sacrifice into the existing spiritual frequency that millions already held sacred. Look at how Jesus taught about timing through his agricultural parables. A sower went out to sow, he would begin, then unfold stories about seeds, seasons, growth periods, and harvest times. These weren't quaint farming analogies. They were precise instructions about working with life's natural rhythms. He understood that spiritual growth follows the same patterns as plant growth. There's a time to plant, a time to water, a time to wait, and a time to harvest. Force any of these phases, and you destroy the entire process. When Jesus said to everything there is a season and a time for every purpose under heaven, he was revealing something revolutionary. Most people fight against life's rhythms, trying to force outcomes when the timing isn't right. They want harvest during planting season, or they expect immediate growth from seeds just placed in soil. Jesus taught the opposite approach, aligning with natural timing rather than opposing it. Watch how Jesus performed his miracles. He didn't frantically rush around healing everyone he encountered. Instead, he moved with an almost musical sense of timing. Sometimes he would slip away from crowds seeking healing, not because he didn't care, but because he understood that even miraculous works must flow with divine rhythm. "My hour has not yet come," he would say, demonstrating that even the Son of God operated within the framework of sacred timing. This rhythm consciousness extended to his teaching style itself. Listen to the cadence of his words in the Beatitudes. Blessed are, blessed are, blessed are. This isn't accidental repetition, it's rhythmic transmission. He structured his teachings like music, using parallel phrases and cyclical themes that resonated with the natural rhythms already embedded in human consciousness. The reason his words have echoed through 2 millennia isn't just their content, it's their rhythmic power. The 40 days Jesus spent in the wilderness represents perhaps the most crucial rhythmic preparation in human history. 40 days isn't arbitrary. It's a complete spiritual cycle, long enough for old patterns to dissolve and new ones to crystallize. Moses spent 40 days on Mount Sinai receiving the law. The Israelites wandered 40 years in the desert. Noah's flood lasted 40 days. Jesus was aligning himself with an ancient rhythm of transformation and emergence. Throughout his ministry, you can trace a perfect rhythm of expansion and contraction. Intense periods of public teaching and healing would be followed by withdrawal into solitude and prayer. He never burned out because he understood the fundamental rhythm of giving and receiving, output and restoration. Most people exhaust themselves by staying locked in output mode, never allowing the natural rhythm of renewal that makes sustained effectiveness possible. Jesus' teachings on abundance reveal deep understanding of rhythmic law. Give, and it shall be given unto you, isn't moral advice, it's rhythmic instruction. All of nature operates on cycles of giving and receiving. Trees give oxygen and receive carbon dioxide. The ocean gives up water through evaporation and receives it back through rain. When you align your giving with natural rhythm rather than forcing it through obligation or manipulation, abundance flows back to you through the same natural law. The resurrection occurring on the 3rd day connects to the deepest rhythms governing life and death throughout nature. Watch any forest through the seasons. Apparent death in winter, followed by the stirring of spring, then the full explosion of summer life. 3 phases: death, germination, rebirth. Jesus' resurrection wasn't supernatural violation of natural law, it was natural law operating at its highest octave. Understanding rhythm transforms how you navigate difficult periods in your own life. When you're experiencing what feels like spiritual winter, loss, confusion, stagnation, rhythm consciousness reminds you that this is temporary. Just as surely as winter gives way to spring, your current challenges are part of a larger cycle moving toward renewal and growth. The key is learning to work with these rhythms rather than exhausting yourself fighting against them. Start paying attention to the rhythms already operating in your life. Notice your natural energy cycles throughout the day. Observe the ebb and flow of your motivation, creativity, and emotional states. Instead of forcing productivity during your natural low periods, use those times for reflection, planning, and restoration. Save your most important work for when your natural rhythm peaks. Jesus demonstrated that miraculous results come not from forcing outcomes, but from perfect alignment with divine timing. His life shows us that when you stop fighting life's rhythms and start dancing with them, you tap into the same creative power that moves planets and grows flowers. You become a conscious participant in the grand symphony of existence, adding your unique note to the eternal song. You know what fascinates me most about studying ancient wisdom alongside Christ's teachings? It's how Jesus understood something that modern psychology is just beginning to grasp, that we live in a universe governed by precise spiritual laws, where every action creates an inevitable reaction. The 6th Hermetic principle states it perfectly: every cause has its effect. Every effect has its cause. Everything happens according to law. Nothing escapes the law. Jesus didn't just teach this principle. He lived it, demonstrated it, and showed us how to work with it rather than against it. When he said, "Whatsoever a man soweth, that shall he also reap," he wasn't making a moral judgment. He was revealing a fundamental law of reality as precise as gravity itself. Think about how radical this understanding really is. In a world where people believed in random fate, angry gods, and arbitrary suffering, Jesus taught that nothing happens by chance. Everything unfolds according to spiritual laws that we can understand and work with. This wasn't fatalism. It was empowerment through knowledge. Consider the parable of the sower, which might be the most practical teaching on cause and effect ever given. Jesus describes identical seeds falling on different types of soil, producing vastly different results. The seed represents divine truth, but the soil, that's your consciousness, your mental and spiritual state. Same cause, different effects, all determined by the condition of the receiving medium. The seed on hard ground gets snatched away immediately. How many times have you heard profound truth but couldn't receive it because your mind was closed, hardened by cynicism or distraction? The seed on rocky soil springs up quickly but withers when challenges come. This is the person who gets excited about spiritual concepts but has no depth of understanding to sustain them through difficulties. The seed among thorns grows but gets choked by the cares of this world and the deceitfulness of riches. Jesus understood that worry and materialism create their own cause and effect cycles that strangle spiritual growth. But the seed on good soil, prepared consciousness, produces fruit 30, 60, even 100-fold. What's brilliant about this teaching is how it shows us that we're not victims of our circumstances. We're co-creators of our experience through the quality of our consciousness. Change the soil, change the harvest. It's spiritual agriculture. Jesus' miracles weren't violations of natural law, they were demonstrations of higher laws in action. When he healed the centurion's servant from a distance, he wasn't breaking the rules of reality. He was showing how faith and love operate as causes that produce healing effects across time and space. The centurion understood authority and recognized that Jesus operated under spiritual laws just as he operated under military ones. Every healing followed the same pattern. The cause of faith, love, or spiritual alignment produced the effect of restoration. The woman who touched his garment experienced healing because, as Jesus said, "Thy faith hath made thee whole." He consistently pointed to the spiritual cause behind the physical effect. But here's where Jesus' understanding gets really profound. He taught that forgiveness could interrupt negative cause and effect cycles. When he told the paralyzed man, "Thy sins be forgiven thee," he wasn't just being compassionate, he was addressing the root cause behind the physical condition. Forgiveness doesn't erase consequences, but it can transform the energy patterns that create ongoing negative effects. This is revolutionary. Most spiritual systems teach that you must suffer through the effects of past causes. Jesus taught that divine love and forgiveness could transmute negative patterns, breaking cycles that might otherwise continue for generations. He literally showed us how to hack the spiritual operating system through grace. When Jesus said, "With what measure ye meet, it shall be measured to you again," he was revealing the mathematical precision of spiritual law. This isn't punishment, it's physics. The universe operates like a perfect mirror, reflecting back the energy we put out. Judge harshly, and you'll experience harsh judgment. Show mercy, and mercy returns to you multiplied. He understood that words and thoughts are causes that create effects in both seen and unseen realms. By thy words thou shalt be justified, and by thy words thou shalt be condemned. Your internal dialogue isn't just commentary on your life, it's actively creating your experience through the law of cause and effect. I love how Jesus approached people caught in negative cycles. He never shamed them for their circumstances, but he helped them see the connection between their consciousness and their experience. To the woman caught in adultery, he said, "Go and sin no more," not as moral judgment, but as practical instruction for creating different effects in her life. His own life became the ultimate demonstration of positive cause and effect. Every act of love, service, and sacrifice created expanding ripples of transformation that continue today. His death and resurrection weren't just historical events, they were causes that produced eternal effects for humanity's spiritual evolution. This is why understanding cause and effect is so liberating. Once you grasp that your current circumstances are largely effects of past causes, your thoughts, beliefs, choices, and actions, you realize you have tremendous power to create different effects by changing your causes right now. You're not a victim of random circumstances. You're a conscious creator working with universal laws. Every thought you think, every word you speak, every action you take is a seed you're planting. Jesus showed us how to plant seeds of love, faith, and service that produce harvests of joy, peace, and abundance. Start paying attention to the cause and effect patterns in your own life. Where you see negative effects, trace them back to their causes with compassion, not judgment. Then consciously plant new seeds through transformed thinking and loving action. This isn't positive thinking, it's practical spirituality based on universal law. The seventh and final Hermetic principle states that gender is in everything. Everything has its masculine and feminine principles. When we observe Jesus' ministry through this lens, something extraordinary emerges, a perfect demonstration of how divine consciousness expresses itself through the balanced integration of both masculine and feminine energies. Now, before we dive deeper, understand that gender in the Hermetic sense has nothing to do with biological sex or modern gender politics. We're talking about fundamental creative forces that permeate all existence, the active and receptive, the penetrating and nurturing, the projective and intuitive aspects of divine consciousness itself. Think about electricity for a moment. You need both positive and negative charges to create the flow that powers everything around you. Similarly, creation itself requires both masculine and feminine principles working in harmony. The masculine principle is the active force. It initiates, projects, penetrates, and gives form. The feminine principle is the receptive force. It nurtures, receives, intuits, and brings forth life. Jesus embodied this balance in ways that were revolutionary for his time and remain profound today. Consider how he treated women in a culture that viewed them as property. While the religious establishment relegated women to the margins, Jesus elevated them as equals in spiritual understanding. He didn't just tolerate their presence, he actively sought their wisdom and recognized their spiritual insights. Look at Mary Magdalene. The traditional narrative has painted her as a reformed prostitute, but deeper investigation reveals something far more significant. She was likely one of Jesus' most spiritually advanced disciples, representing the divine feminine principle in full expression. In the Gnostic Gospel of Philip, she's described as the disciple Jesus loved more than all the others, not because of romantic attachment, but because of her profound spiritual comprehension. When Jesus appeared after his resurrection, who did he reveal himself to first? Not Peter, not John, not any of the male disciples who would later lead the early church. He appeared to Mary Magdalene and the other women. In that culture, women couldn't even serve as legal witnesses in court, yet Jesus chose them to be the first witnesses and messengers of humanity's greatest spiritual victory. This wasn't coincidence. It was the divine feminine principle being honored as the vessel through which the most profound spiritual truths are received and transmitted. But Jesus himself perfectly balanced both energies within his own being. Watch how he demonstrates the divine masculine when he cleanses the temple, overturning tables and driving out the money changers with righteous authority. My Father's house shall be called a house of prayer, but you have made it a den of thieves. This is the masculine principle in action, direct, forceful, penetrating through corruption with unwavering strength. Yet observe the same, man weeping at Lazarus's tomb, showing emotional vulnerability that most men of his era would never display publicly. See him gently blessing children when his disciples try to turn them away, or tenderly washing his disciples' feet in an act of humble service. This is the divine feminine expressing itself through compassion, nurturing care, and intuitive understanding of what others truly need. His parables reveal this balance beautifully. He speaks of kings and judges and masters of households, masculine imagery of authority and structure. But he also tells stories of wise virgins preparing for the bridegroom, of a woman searching diligently for her lost coin, of the kingdom of heaven being like yeast that a woman kneads into bread until the whole batch rises. He understood that spiritual truth resonates through both masculine and feminine consciousness. Even Jesus' birth demonstrates this principle in action. The divine masculine, the word, the logos, the active creative force of God, could only enter physical reality through the divine feminine, represented by Mary. She becomes the receptive vessel, the sacred womb of consciousness through which the infinite takes finite form. "Let it be unto me according to your word," she declares, the perfect expression of feminine receptivity to divine will. In his healing ministry, Jesus consistently balanced masculine authority with feminine compassion. When he heals the woman with the issue of blood, he doesn't just cure her condition, he calls her daughter and tells her that her faith has made her whole. The masculine power to heal combines with feminine understanding of her deeper need for dignity and belonging. This integration appears throughout his interactions with both male and female disciples. With men like Peter, he develops their capacity for spiritual receptivity and intuitive understanding. With women like Martha and Mary, he honors their different approaches to spiritual seeking, Martha's active service, and Mary's contemplative listening, showing that both masculine doing and feminine being have their place in spiritual development. Here's what most people miss about spiritual development. We all contain both masculine and feminine energies, regardless of our biological sex. True spiritual mastery requires developing and balancing both aspects within ourselves. The masculine without the feminine becomes rigid, dominating, and spiritually sterile. The feminine without the masculine becomes passive, ungrounded, and unable to manifest spiritual insights in practical reality. Modern spirituality often swings too far in either direction. Some approaches emphasize only the masculine, aggressive goal setting, forceful manifestation techniques, spiritual bypassing of emotional needs. Others focus exclusively on the feminine, endless inner work without practical application, spiritual passivity disguised as surrender, intuitive insights that never translate into concrete action. Jesus shows us a different way. He demonstrates that spiritual wholeness comes through integration, not domination of one principle over another. His strength never diminishes his tenderness. His compassion never weakens his authority. His receptivity to divine guidance never undermines his decisive action in the world. If you want to develop this balance in your own spiritual journey, start by honestly assessing which energy you tend to overexpress and which you tend to suppress. Are you always pushing, striving, forcing outcomes? You may need to cultivate more feminine receptivity, listening, and trust in divine timing. Are you constantly waiting for signs, avoiding decisive action, staying perpetually in preparation mode? You might need to develop more masculine initiative, structure, and willingness to take spiritual risks. The goal isn't to become androgynous or to eliminate the beautiful differences between masculine and feminine expression. The goal is wholeness, becoming a complete vessel through which divine consciousness can express itself fully, just as it did through Jesus 2,000 years ago. When you step back and look at how these 7 principles weave through Jesus' teachings, something remarkable emerges. You're not looking at separate spiritual concepts that happen to overlap. You're witnessing a complete operating system for consciousness itself. Jesus wasn't teaching religion as we understand it today. He was demonstrating how reality actually works at its deepest level. Think about the Sermon on the Mount through this lens. When Jesus says, "Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth," he's not offering consolation to the downtrodden. He's revealing how the principle of polarity works in spiritual dynamics. True power flows through surrender, not force. The meek understand rhythm. They know when to act and when to yield. They've mastered the mental principle by recognizing that outer circumstances correspond to inner states. This single beatitude contains all 7 principles working in harmony. Or consider the moment Jesus calms the storm. His disciples see a miracle, but what's really happening demonstrates every principle simultaneously. His mental mastery creates the template for calm waters, as above, so below. His vibrational authority speaks directly to the molecular structure of wind and wave. He understands that storms and stillness are polarities of the same force, and he consciously shifts the rhythm from chaos to peace. The cause and effect is immediate because he's operating from perfect alignment with natural law. And notice the gender balance. He doesn't fight the storm with masculine force, but receives it with feminine receptivity, then transforms it through conscious direction. This is why Jesus' teachings have survived every attempt to water them down or institutionalize them. You can't destroy universal principles. They keep reasserting themselves because they're woven into the fabric of existence itself. When early church councils tried to reduce his message to doctrine, the principles kept breaking through. When medieval authorities attempted to control access to his words, mystics kept rediscovering these same truths through direct experience. Here's what changes everything. Recognizing these principles transforms how you engage with every aspect of spiritual practice. Prayer stops being petition and becomes conscious co-creation. You understand that your mental state creates correspondence between your inner world and outer circumstances. You pray from the vibrational frequency of already having what you're asking for, because you know like attracts like. You time your prayers with natural rhythms, knowing that certain states of consciousness are more receptive than others. Faith becomes something entirely different too. Instead of believing despite evidence, you develop confidence in how consciousness operates. You've seen the principles work. You understand the mechanics. When Jesus says, "If you have faith like a grain of mustard seed, you will say to this mountain, 'Move from here to there,' and it will move." You recognize he's describing the principle of mentalism combined with vibrational authority. The mountain is mental first, the limitation, the obstacle, the fixed belief. Move it there, and physical reality follows. This understanding bridges what seems like an impossible gap between Eastern and Western spirituality. Buddhist concepts of interdependence align perfectly with the principle of correspondence. Hindu teachings about karma reveal the same cause and effect principles Jesus demonstrated. Taoist wisdom about yin and yang mirrors his understanding of gender and polarity. The meditation practices of contemplatives across traditions all work with rhythm and vibration. What's fascinating is how modern quantum physics keeps validating these ancient insights. When scientists discover that consciousness affects physical reality at the quantum level, they're confirming what Jesus demonstrated 2,000 years ago. When researchers find that intention can influence random number generators or the growth rate of plants, they're measuring the principle of mentalism in action. The double-slit experiment shows us that the act of observation changes reality. Exactly what Jesus meant when he said, "According to your faith, let it be done unto you." For traditional Christianity, this doesn't threaten core beliefs. It reveals their true power. The Trinity takes on deeper meaning when you understand the principle of gender. The Father represents the masculine principle of direction and will. The Holy Spirit embodies the feminine principle of receptivity and nurturing. The Son demonstrates their perfect balance in human form. Salvation isn't just forgiveness, it's the restoration of your natural ability to operate as a conscious co-creator with divine intelligence. This is where some people feel resistance, and I understand why. We've been taught to see ourselves as separate from divine power, dependent on external authority for spiritual truth. But Jesus consistently pointed people back to their own divine nature. The kingdom of heaven is within you. You are the light of the world. Greater works than these shall you do. He wasn't setting himself apart. He was showing what becomes possible when you understand and apply these principles. The practical applications are immediate and profound. Instead of struggling against circumstances, you learn to work with polarity, finding the seed of opportunity in every challenge. Rather than forcing outcomes, you align with natural rhythms, taking inspired action when the timing is right. You stop trying to change others and focus on your own vibrational state, knowing that your inner transformation creates corresponding changes in your outer world. When Jesus gave the Great Commission, "Go therefore and make disciples of all nations," he wasn't asking people to spread a religion. He was commissioning them to teach this consciousness-based approach to life, to help others discover their own divine nature and learn to operate from these universal principles. This is why his message was meant for all nations, all cultures, all peoples. These principles work regardless of your background, beliefs, or circumstances. What we're really talking about is a return to the original power of Jesus' teachings. Before centuries of institutional interpretation, before political agendas and doctrinal disputes, there was a man who understood how consciousness creates reality and taught others to do the same. He demonstrated that the kingdom of heaven isn't a place you go after death. It's a state of consciousness you can access right now by understanding and applying these timeless principles. This synthesis represents more than theological insight. It's practical spiritual technology that can transform your life starting today. When you begin to see these 7 principles operating in everything Jesus taught and did, you're not just gaining knowledge. You're recovering your birthright as a conscious co-creator with the divine intelligence that governs all existence. Now comes the moment where everything we've explored transforms from fascinating knowledge into lived reality. You've seen how the 7 Hermetic principles weave through Jesus' teachings like golden threads, creating a complete tapestry of spiritual understanding. But wisdom without application remains merely intellectual entertainment. The real question becomes, how do you actually live these principles and develop the same level of consciousness that Jesus demonstrated? Let me be clear about something crucial here. Christ consciousness isn't about adopting a religious label or joining a particular denomination. It's about embodying the same mastery of universal laws, the same depth of spiritual understanding, and the same capacity to channel divine love that Jesus exemplified. When he said, "Greater works than these shall you do," he wasn't speaking to a select few. He was revealing the potential that exists within every human being who learns to align with these eternal principles. The principle of mentalism becomes your daily foundation. Every morning, before you check your phone or rush into the day's demands, spend 10 minutes monitoring your thoughts. Notice what beliefs are running automatically in the background of your mind. Are you thinking from fear or love, scarcity or abundance, separation or unity? Jesus demonstrated perfect mental discipline because he understood that thoughts are the seeds of reality. Start small. When you catch yourself thinking, "I can't afford this," or "this always happens to me," pause and consciously align with divine truth instead. Replace limitation with possibility, complaint with gratitude, judgment with compassion. Correspondence reveals itself through pattern recognition. Begin observing the connections between your inner states and outer circumstances. When you're feeling chaotic internally, notice how your environment reflects that chaos. When you cultivate inner peace, watch how smoother interactions and better opportunities begin appearing. This isn't wishful thinking, it's the natural operation of universal law. Jesus understood this completely when he taught about the kingdom of heaven being within. Change your inner kingdom, and your outer world must respond accordingly. Working with vibration requires conscious attention to your words, emotions, and energy output. Jesus never spoke carelessly because he understood that every word carries creative power. Monitor your speech for 1 week. Notice how often you use words that diminish rather than elevate, that create separation rather than connection. Replace "I have to" with "I choose to." Transform "that's impossible" into "I'm open to new possibilities." Your emotional state directly affects your vibrational frequency. So develop practices that help you maintain emotional equilibrium. This might be breathwork, prayer, time in nature, or conscious gratitude. The principle of polarity becomes your tool for transformation rather than your source of suffering. When challenging situations arise, and they will, resist the temptation to label them as purely negative. Instead, ask yourself, what's the opposite pole of this experience? How can I use this apparent setback as a stepping stone toward greater wisdom or strength? Jesus demonstrated this perfectly when he transformed the ultimate polarity, death itself, into resurrection and new life. Every difficulty contains the seeds of its own opposite, if you're willing to look with spiritual eyes. Rhythm asks you to align with divine timing rather than forcing outcomes through willpower alone. Pay attention to natural cycles in your own life. Notice when you're in seasons of expansion versus seasons of rest, periods of learning versus periods of integration. Jesus honored rhythm when he withdrew to pray after intense ministry periods. He understood that sustainable spiritual work requires alternating between action and contemplation, giving and receiving, speaking and listening. The principle of cause and effect transforms you from victim to conscious creator. Every action you take, every word you speak, every thought you think sets causes in motion. Begin taking full responsibility for the effects showing up in your life, not from a place of self-blame, but from empowerment. If you want different results, trace back to the causes you're setting in motion. Forgiveness becomes essential here because it's the only way to transform negative karmic patterns. When Jesus taught about forgiveness, he was revealing the mechanism for breaking cycles of cause and effect that no longer serve. Gender requires balancing your masculine and feminine energies regardless of your physical gender. Develop your masculine qualities through decisive action, clear boundaries, and logical thinking. Cultivate your feminine aspects through intuitive listening, emotional intelligence, and receptive openness to divine guidance. Jesus embodied this balance perfectly, strong enough to overturn tables in the temple, gentle enough to bless children, wise enough to confound scholars, humble enough to wash feet. You'll face obstacles on this path. Family members might think you're becoming too spiritual or impractical. Cultural conditioning will resist these new ways of thinking and being. Self-doubt will whisper that you're not capable of such transformation. This is normal and expected. Remember that Jesus faced similar resistance from his own family and community. The key is finding others who understand this journey. Seek out communities, whether online or in person, where these principles are being lived and discussed. Measure your progress not by dramatic supernatural experiences, but by subtle shifts in your daily responses. Are you more patient with difficult people? Do you find yourself less reactive to challenging circumstances? Are you naturally thinking more loving thoughts? These are the real indicators of developing Christ consciousness. Be patient with yourself in this process. Jesus spent 30 years preparing for 3 years of active ministry. Spiritual development unfolds in its own timing, and forced growth often leads to spiritual pride rather than genuine transformation. Stay humble, remembering that the goal isn't personal aggrandizement, but becoming a clearer channel for divine love to flow through you into the world. As you master these principles, something beautiful begins happening. You naturally become more loving, more generous, more wise in your interactions. You start solving problems instead of creating them, healing divisions instead of deepening them, bringing light into dark situations instead of adding to the darkness. This is what Jesus meant when he called his followers the light of the world. The ultimate vision here is communities of people who understand these principles, families where love and wisdom guide decisions, workplaces where integrity and compassion create abundance for everyone involved. When enough individuals develop Christ consciousness through these eternal principles, we begin seeing the kingdom of heaven manifesting on earth, not as some future event, but as present reality created by transformed human beings. If this video resonated with you and you're ready to begin this journey of practical spiritual transformation, let us know by commenting, "I understood it,"